To have you here for another session of Unity Hour, a series we designed to keep us all moving together well apart. My name's Colleen Curtis, Chief Community Officer at the Mom Project. Katie, our program director, is womaning the YouTube chat. You might see her there as you attend live. And Hiba, our social media manager and de facto host of all things at the Mom Project, is also here as my backup and co-host here today. As a reminder, this entire session will be recorded. It can then be accessed via the Mom Project YouTube channel. You'll also receive an email with the link and follow-up items if you've RSVP'd to the session. So we've got you covered. We know things come up, dogs bark, kids cry, snacks are needed. So if you need to pause, you can watch it as soon as the session is done. So we all know this has been a whirlwind year, and I just want to thank you all for RSVPing today and coming to this session. Thank you to those watching live and those who are going to be watching this replay. Unity's become increasingly important as we all continue to navigate layers upon layers of challenges, and we're glad you're here with us this week. So all of us at the Mom Project are super grateful for you and all the contributions you've made so far. If you're new to the Mom Project or need a refresher, we are a digital talent marketplace and community where moms can realize their full potential. We have jobs with family-friendly companies we hope to connect you to as you work through your job search, but we have so much more. We're building the tools and platform you need to unlock opportunities and open the doors for each other as we all navigate working motherhood. We are just so glad you're here. A big part of this realization is how we strategize and implement effective policy at home. Yes, that's right, fair play. Many of you tuning in today have been taking much of the burden at home, whether this was true pre-pandemic or has become glaringly obvious over the past 9 months. An equitable division of the domestic labor at home is paramount to our ability to thrive at home and at work. With the holidays approaching and the pandemic showing signs of climbing its own career ladder, we are bringing it home today. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Eve Rodsky, best-selling author and mother, working to change society one household at a time by coming up with a new 21st century solution to an age-old problem: women shouldering the brunt of child rearing and domestic life responsibilities, regardless of whether they work outside the home. In her New York Times bestselling book, Fair Play, she uses her Harvard Law School training and years of organizational management experience to create a life management system to help couples both rebalance all of the work it takes to run a home and reimagine their relationship, time, and purpose. Eve has interviewed more than 500 men and women from all walks of life to figure out what the invisible work in a family actually entails and how to get it all done efficiently. With 4 easy-to-follow rules, 100 household tasks, and a figurative card game you play with your partner, Fair Play helps you prioritize what's important to your family and who should take the lead in every chore, from laundry to homework to dinner. And so we are so excited to have Eve here today with us for this session. Excited to learn more about the book. Also, Eve has just been an incredible activist in the space, championing working mothers and our ability to kind of maintain our careers, especially as we navigate this pandemic. So Eve, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Hiba, for having me. I love the Mom Project. I think our missions align perfectly. And so I was so excited to be on your Unity Hour.
Yes, well, thank you. I mean, I know I personally also struggle with this. I have the book, and we're really excited to get into this. We're going to run this as a Q&A. To all our folks tuned in live on the live chat, please submit your questions. We'll take those and get as many to Eve as we can. So I guess I'd love to just start out with, what is your origin story? Like, why you? Why Fair Play? So how did this all come out? Well, how did you kind of find yourself in this work?
Well, I write about this, and that was hard. You know, it's hard to tell your own story, but I think that the more women tell their stories and they look like different stories of success, then the better. I did not, Colleen and Hiba, as you know from knowing me, I did not set out to be a gendered division of labor specialist or expert. That was not on my life's plan when I was, 10 years old in the playground. But I talk about sort of these moments in your life that feel like really low moments of personal sadness and trauma, and how ultimately they will lead to growth if you allow them to. And for me, that's how Fair Play started. It was way before the pandemic. This is 9 years ago, where and I write about this, how Seth, my husband, sends me a text in the middle of a day that says, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." So let's unpack why I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries changed the trajectory of my life. Well, that day, we can all sort of picture that day, because it reminds me actually a lot of what's happening now, where it felt like the space and time continuum was sort of collapsing on me. I had a breast pump so let's just picture the text coming in, right? As it was coming in, I had a breast pump and a diaper bag on the passenger seat of my car. I had gifts for a newborn baby to return in the back seat of my car. I'm highly analog, so I had dropped out of the corporate workforce. And I say opted out, dropped out in quotes, because from now on, I will ask the Mom Project to use the word forced out. Language matters. We don't, as my friend Michelle King says, we don't want to fix women, we want to fix workplaces. But at that point, I thought I had to fix myself. I was of the lean in generation. And so I had my analog, you see, I'm very analog. I had this client contract that was in my lap because I had opted out, dropped out, forced myself out of the traditional work, was forced out of the traditional workforce. And I had started my own firm, my own law firm. And I thought that somehow that was magically going to give me the flexibility I needed. Never occurred to me that Seth, actually my partner, may be the reason that I was overwhelmed. Just that I need more flexibility. So I had a client contract in my lap, and I remember distinctly there was a pen in between my legs. And every time I would hit the brakes as I was racing to get my older son, Zach, at his toddler transition program, which in America, those programs last 7 minutes when we even had them. Now we have no backup childcare. This pen in between my legs would sort of stab me in the vagina. And so my metaphor in that day was sort of being stabbed in the vagina by this pen. And that where I live in LA now, I'm from New York, but the idea that I pulled over means something was happening to me. I don't take traffic lightly. Angelinos do not take traffic lightly. So the fact that I pulled over on the side of the road over this text meant that obviously something more was going on. And I really was a mess. I was crying, thinking to myself, well, I guess the first thing I thought was, it was super cliche that I was crying over being the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs. But, I thought maybe my marriage would end over something more dramatic, like my affair with an NFL player. Like that's how my marriage story should end, not fighting over off-season blueberries. But I think more importantly for the Mom Project was this sense that I had that I was still blaming myself. I was blaming myself, saying, wow, I used to be able to manage employee teams. And now I'm so overwhelmed, I can't even manage a grocery list. And then, of course, I was thinking, how had I become the default? I call in fair play the she fault for literally every single household task, childcare and housework task for my family. That was not, and I'll tell you about two privileges why that should not have happened to me. One was that I had my eyes open really early. I was the product of a single mother. I still am. She's amazing. But I was her partner. Psychologists called me over the years a parental child, where I would sort of line up her eviction notices or late utility bills, remind her to pay them, explain to her why my brother wasn't reading and that he was disabled and nobody seemed to notice or care. So early on, I saw the struggle and I was trying to help fill those gaps for my mom. And so I vowed early, 7, 8, 9, that I would have an equal partner in life. And I married that equal partner. And I think the second privilege that I want to talk about is that I'm a Harvard trained mediator, as you wonderfully said. I'm literally trained to use my voice. And so I figured if this was happening to me, this complete overwhelm, this she fault experience that had forced me out of the corporate workforce, then it was probably happening to other women. And that was the day I went on a quest to understand what was happening to me. And ultimately it led to fair play 8 years later. But it really started with that personal understanding that what was happening to me was not okay and not sustainable anymore.
I muted so you wouldn't get interrupted. Well, we're so glad that you wrote this book. And I think, where we want to start is at home, but I think also, given our audience and that predominantly either are job seekers or folks who are currently in the workforce struggling through all the challenges we have right now, we will transition into that workplace piece. So I guess as we start to talk a little bit about fair play and how that kind of incorporates into the household, I guess just giving the audience a brief on this. So why is this so important right now that we get this right? And how has it sort of changed since, I think it came out in 2018.
Yeah.
I mean, things have clearly changed quite a lot. What would you say, like, how do we get our arms around this right now?
Well, I think the most important thing is what my favorite sociologist says, C. Wright Mills, that private lives are public issues, or we've heard the personal is political. I think the home is really dangerous because it presents really small. And what I mean by that is I thought I was divorcing over off-season blueberries. I had a man in White Plains tell me he was divorcing over a glue stick. So we can unpack what that means. But what I want to say is that the women of the Mom Project, right? The women who you serve, it's so important to understand what was happening to us. And I think when I realized that this wasn't just a me problem, that understanding allowed me a little freedom to have some grace, right? That I didn't have to fix myself. And that happened actually on a day of a breast cancer march. And the reason why I think that's important is because I'll sort of tell you what all these powerful women look like around me. I was on this march right after that Blueberries Day. And why that was important was because I was starting to notice unfairness in other people's relationships as well. And I was with 9 women. It looked like Heba and Colleen, really very amazing women, the head of stroke and trauma for Cedar Sinai, my friend who's an Oscar winning producer, really, really amazing, powerful women. And we're all at this march. We're covered in pink. We have signs that say not just a female problem. It was this really beautiful girlfriend's getaway day. But what I remember that day was what happened to us at noon, because I talk about this in the book because it's like I call it like the reverse Cinderella, where I may have not have been woke to this before, but now that my eyes were open, I noticed that every single one of us at noon, our phones started blowing up. So we were 10 women. And things started coming in. This was not just hetero-cisgender relationships, but it was primarily hetero-cisgender relationships. But our phone started blowing up with things like, where did you put Huston's soccer bag? My other friend's partner, what's the address of the birthday party? And why didn't you leave me a gift? My favorite was my friend Kate's husband, and his text said, do the kids need to eat lunch? And so what I remember about that day was all of these powerful women who use their voice in every other domain looked at me and said, thanks, Eve, for the dim sum reservation. But actually, we left our partners with too much to do. And they raced home to find the soccer bag, to take a perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party, and to feed their kids lunch. And so before they left, I said, you know what? I get it, but I'm not going to let you leave until you give me a little bit of active resistance. I want to count up how many phone calls and texts we received. And we had 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women over 30 minutes. And why that's important is because that is what ultimately the mental load is. That is what we hear as emotional labor. That is what is called the second shift. We've been talking about these issues, and now I've been witnessing these issues in my life for 100 years. So my question after that day was, how do we get towards a solution where we can take agency in our own home, where I'm not saying you have to fix yourself by waking up an hour earlier. No, real systemic change. And so at that day, Colleen, I had 3 choices. My choices were, 1, I could eat, pray, love it, right? Eat, pray, love this shit out of here. And I do think, we see that beautiful narrative of like an untamed or an eat, pray, love. But I do think it's also a very privileged narrative to say that you can blow up your life, because I had many women, often in working class professions, who said to me, I don't have that luxury to blow up my life. I need a dual income household while my children are young. So that was an option, to blow up my life. Option 2 was to resign myself to continue doing everything for my family that got me to cry on the side of the road and lose my identity in the process, which was happening to me before my eyes. Or the third was to get my ass in gear and become my own client. And so what my day job is I'm a family mediator. I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. And you should all feel bad for me because those families are crazy. But what I do for them is I create grace and humor and generosity by having systems based on values so that families can talk to each other through very hard organizational and financial decisions. And so when I realized that I can start asking a question, what if we started treating our home like our most important organization? that we actually value it. We haven't never valued it because it's women's work. But now, what if we actually valued the home? And that was the questions I started to ask when I went into the research phase of Fair Play.
It's incredible. I relate to that breast cancer walk story. I've definitely lived through that experience. So, wanted to take a question here from the audience quickly because I know this is something we talked about as we prepped for this session. But from one of our community members, hi Eve, great to see you again. So they must have attended another session. Is there a way to apply all that you've learned in your guidance to single mother households where there is no partner with whom to divide and conquer? And I know that's something that we had broached a couple of days ago. And so would love just your thoughts for this community.
Absolutely. So we will get into what the cards are. But actually, I'll tell you one practical way a single mother was using Fair Play. They had an alimony mediation, and her partner was saying to her during the divorce that she does nothing, that he makes her life, and she was able to take these and say, no, actually, I make your life. Like, this is what was required to allow you to have uninterrupted time in the workplace. And so she actually is using that family mediator is using the Fair Play cards to start to value all the invisible work. So that was very exciting to hear. And so I do think that there are practical ways that we can start to make the invisible visible. And so it'll actually help us in our divorce negotiations. But for single mothers who don't have a partner in the home, like my mother, my father left us when my mother was pregnant with my brother, what she said was that Fair Play became a love letter to her because she said nobody saw this, right? Nobody saw this. And it was so shaming to her to ask for help that when she actually saw this and said, like, I can't believe I did this all by myself. The permission not only to say, I don't need to have all these cards on my plate, or maybe my life may look different than your life, and to tell your kids, I may not have a perfectly wrapped gift, and that's okay because I'm bringing other values to our home. And also for her to say to herself, I need some freaking supports. I need some support. So in two ways, I'll say this applies to single mothers. One is that you absolutely need a community, right? You need a community. We have not set ourselves up for that in America. You cannot do this alone. And it could be the Mom Project community, it could be the Fair Play community. And number two is that I pledge the rest of my life to fight on behalf of single mothers. And the best way I can do that is to give you financial power. Because the motherhood penalty for single mothers is the worst penalty on record in terms of bias against women, and especially Black women, right? Because Black women are 85% of the co-breadwinners or primary breadwinners in their home. And we can unpack that for a whole other session about why and what systemic racism has done to Black men. But when you are a single mother in this society, you get half the wages of a white non-Latino man. And that is just unacceptable. So I will say that from a understanding perspective, that you can use this to say that I need a village to do this, including your children. They can help you. They can be fair players, just like I was. I was a parental child, as I said. But more importantly, it's time to rebuild society so that we value care and so that you have the same financial power as a non-Latino white man. And that's what I can pledge to single mothers who are on this call.
Thank you so much for that. It's just a challenge we have to continue to press on. It's going to require so much structural and systemic overhaul to be able to support single mothers at scale.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it at the end about what policies we're working on together and what Hello Sunshine's helping me do with a care coalition and what we're actually fighting for. Yeah, because you all are here to be cultural warriors, right? You can help us. And I will say one last thing that my friend said: why are bars and restaurants open, but schools are not, right? Which would help single mothers a lot. As my mother said, she probably would not have had her mental health if our schools had ever closed. The New York City public schools had never closed in 18 years. The reason why is, according to my friend, who's a very well-known politician, is because there's no lobby. There's nobody calling saying, did you know that the playgrounds are closed? My friend said she didn't even know that the playgrounds were still closed. in California because no one was calling her, but the restaurant lobby was calling her every day.
Yeah. Who lobbies for moms?
Right. That's what I think we can do together, right?
Yeah.
That's what we want to create.
Yeah, we had posted an article yesterday to some of our social channels that was in the New York Times about, okay, things are falling apart and moms are the backup plan. Well, who's the backup plan for the moms, right? Like
right. That's Kane Miller's article, but that also came from a colleague of mine's article that's on our Care Coalition. And I actually think her title was better, which said, other countries have social safety nets. America has mothers.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wait, do you want to get into the cards?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's get into the cards.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what is the change I'm asking of households. And I want to unpack this for a second because I think, especially in the pandemic, the perception of value is starting to come out, meaning that I talk about this all the time, and I'm seeing gender economists also now talk about this. This has to do with the core finding of fair play, which is the operating principle of the system, right? You can see how these easily can become a list, and lists alone don't work, but systems do. So what is a system? People are afraid of systems. So systems really are just three things. They are a way to have explicitly defined expectations. They're a way to have fairness and transparency, and they're a way to know your role. That's it. And so when I say systems, people get scared, but it's actually really amazing because imagine that you will not die in decision fatigue if you know who's taking the dog out before it's about to take a piss on your rug. And so this is how fair play came about. It came about because I started to ask women and men of all walks of life that mirror the US Census, and that's what took me so long. I needed data, and I love data, and I have a robust bibliography that was cut down because we didn't have enough pages for the self-help book that they said should have been 280 pages and was 365 pages. But I love data. And what I started to ask men and women what was, because everybody has some sort of condiment in their refrigerator. How did yellow mustard get in your refrigerator? It's my favorite question. It was a standard question in my questionnaire. And when I talk to people on lines and airports, on social media. And so it often broke down exactly the same as I would work with my clients in my day job, that there are three phases of project management here. Somebody has to conceive, Colleen, that your second son, Johnny, likes French's yellow mustard on his protein, otherwise he chokes, right? Someone knows that, and that he's eating his protein better if he has that yellow mustard there. That is what we call the conception phase, if I was breaking this down for an organization. Then someone has to survey the mustard for when it's running low and feel it and be like, oh, we're almost run out of mustard. We don't have any in the pantry. And get stakeholder buy-in, which is another word we use in the business world, for whatever everybody else needs for the week. That is the planning phase. And then someone has to get their butt to the store to go purchase the yellow mustard. And that in organizational management is the execution phase. So what was happening over and over again when I would break it down with couples or individuals that I was talking to had children in their home, or even not around. I used condiments were happening with people who don't have children in the home, right? This could be with a roommate. It was often that there was one person in charge of the conception and planning, which was a woman. And in cisgender relationships, men were stepping in at the execution, the going to the store to go buy the French's yellow mustard. And then they bring home spicy Dijon every fucking time. And I asked for French's yellow. And like, I don't understand. Are you blind? Are you literally blind? You've been sitting here for 7 years. Do you not see what Johnny is eating every night at dinner? And so you see how my tone, my language, right? It all starts changing because what I realized was happening was that people were actually talking about something way deeper than mustard, right? They were talking about accountability and trust. Now imagine that every single household conversation you have becomes about accountability and trust. You know how depressing that is? You know how stressful that is? Do you know how you clam up and never have these conversations and then just seethe and then just do it yourself? That's what happens. And so the core premise of fair play was, what if we brought the same ownership mindset we bring to the workplace to the home? And that's what started to happen, where for us, For me and Seth, it was definitely not going to be 50-50 at first, right? This is a lot of stuff that had been on my plate for many, many years. But what I was able to do with that ownership mindset is sit down with Seth when my emotion was low and cognition is high and start saying to him, I really appreciate that you say that you are in charge of extracurricular sports for Zach and little Ben, who was really little at the time. I really appreciate you say that because you get to the Little League field or the AYSO field on time on Saturdays. But I'm going to give you the 17 conception and planning steps that are happening just to get you to that field. I'm surveying my kids' friends to see who's playing what league and what sport they want to play in. Researching the leagues for the best ones for them, for our budget, for our commute. That's conception. And then Seth, here's all the planning steps. I Xerox 5 copies of their birth certificate and I have to bring it to the field. I log onto a portal where it never works because it's from like 1968. I have to print out consent forms that always, somehow end up breaking my computer when I'm trying to print out those consent forms. I'm on a text with 72 other people about coordinating carpool. I cannot wait to add you to that text and for me to get off that text. I'm somehow in charge of a coach's gift. Not sure how that happened, but I had to install Venmo because I'm getting a coach's gift. And I'm, of course, responsible for bringing the equipment to the field and a water bottle and sunscreen. So thank you. I appreciate it. Once you own that for me, I'm going to get 6 to 10 hours of my week back. And that's just one of the 100 tasks that are on my plate. And that's how we started. We started where we were, which was that. Because when I tell you that when I first created the system, Seth held zero cards, except for the patriarchal card of money manager, which I don't want any man to hold. And then we went to a place where by the time I was on my book tour, he was holding all the cards. And so I think the reason why I say that is because this is a practice. This is not a silver bullet. If you think you're going to get fit by exercising once, I know I do. I feel fit after like 20-minute walk and I'm like, I'm good for the year. That doesn't work, right? Everything good in life takes practice and you have to start where you are. So that's really the core premise of Fair Play. It's the idea that an ownership mindset of, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait here till you tell me what to do. That's not how we do anything in the workplace, and we should not be doing that at home.
I felt that sports example deep in my soul, Eve. Yes, that's a very illustrative one that I think details that, how exactly that comes to light. That's really helpful. I also have written on my whiteboard desk Fair Play cards because I really like the size of those. They're
they're very substantial. Exactly.
Yeah, they like them. They should be. They should maybe be bigger.
That is right. They're really heavy. And I think that metaphor, right? This is a metaphor for the weight of what we're holding.
Yes. Okay. So I know we have a lot of people on this call who are at various points, right? So maybe they're holding all and their partner's holding zero. Or what do you recommend? I know this is in the book, but if you can just give us the soundbite version of like, how do you start communicating in a more effective way to really turn the home into an organization like you would at work? Like, what are your sort of, I imagine a lot of it boils down to communication.
Yes. And I'd say the magical formula. So we just attacked one piece of the formula. The magical formula, really to me, that I see all over the place in the most amazing empowered women that are in really important roles, like Indra Nui and my friend Deanna Bass. She ended up getting divorced. That was her solution. But her husband ended up doing a lot more when they were separated. The most empowered women I know follow this formula, and that is the idea around boundaries, systems, and communication. So we just did systems, right? So many people did Fair Play, even obviously before knowing what it was. Inherently, they did what they call domain splitting. They had their partners having ownership in the home really early, and they realized how important that was to get the conception and planning, right? That cognitive labor off your plate. Because obviously, if I have to remind you to do something, it's not getting it off my plate. So we just talked about the ownership mindset. That's the systems piece of the magic formula. And then I want to get to communication, but actually I want to step through boundaries first. because we hear so much about boundaries these days. And sometimes I laugh because I was reading this article on boundaries from Harvard Business Review that was before the pandemic, but it was from this awesome white dude. And he said the way to create boundaries is you have 2 uninterrupted days a week. That's it. I'm like, women are interrupted every 3 minutes and 42 seconds, right? I don't know what, thank you, very white, privileged white dude, for your amazing advice, but that's not going to work for anybody that I know, right? And I was like, who's protecting your uninterrupted day, right? And I actually think a lot of men do have that right now. I think a lot of men do have uninterrupted days. Or they are the ones who get the office and their wives are telling me that they're trying to work at the same table as their kids while their kids are asking for snacks, while their kids are interrupting them. And so a boundary is not taking a walk around the block. A boundary for women, especially, is this idea which became the core finding of fair play, which is that all time is created equal. A boundary is you recognizing that your time is as valuable as your partner's time, and that you deserve as much as a permission to be unavailable from your roles as a parent, a partner, and a professional as your partner has. And so that was actually the hardest part for me, Colleen. Before I could even get to communicate with Seth, I ended up writing to women. Fair Play is a book for women because of how shocking it was about how women all over this country were the worst purveyors of what I call toxic time messages, where we know men and society devalue women's time, right? As we said earlier, we can't, if you're a woman of color, you're getting 50 cents on the dollar for every non-Latino white man in the workplace. We know an hour does not exchange for an hour. But in the home, it was coming up everywhere in the home. And I'd ask women all over, why are you the one picking up the call from the school? Why? When your kid is sick? Explain that to me. So it always broken down into 3 things, which we have to notice set a boundary. We cannot say these 3 things to ourselves. And if you have said these 3 things to yourself, then thank you for letting me distill 8 years of consciousness into 1 hour. But the first was, oh, my job is more flexible, right? My husband makes more money than me. So that's a huge one. But the reason why that one's so bad is because flexibility is in the eye of the beholder. So what studies show is that if you have a professor and a doctor, a woman's the professor, the man is a doctor. The woman says, well, my job is more flexible as a professor. You switch roles. You have a female doctor, you have a male professor. The woman still says, my job is more flexible because I'm a doctor. So, or a professor, whatever it was. Flexibility is in the eye of the beholder. We're way more willing to say our job is flexible. We're way more willing, like I was, to be forced out of the workforce, to ask for flexibility and get penalized for it. We lose 5 to 10% of our wages. Women, 43% of us take a career detour after kids. These are all things the Mom Project talks about. This is because we get into this time is money, right, situation. And so the idea would be that because I chose philanthropy and my husband chose private equity, if I believe that time is money, then that would mean I'm relegated to doing this forever. Even though I will say to you, I actually believe my job is more valuable because I'm helping people give money back into the world. And so we have to eschew that argument about my time. I have more flexibility. My husband makes more money. Like, that's just a terrible argument because, and we know time is not money because even women who make more than their partners still do more housework and childcare. So the next 2 arguments were even more insidious. And those were, I'm wired differently. I'm a better multitasker. That was mine because I grew up, I said, as a parental child, I'm great at everything. I don't need your help. And so I had to find out what the truth was about the brain. Of course, there is, just spoiler alert, right? There's no gender division difference in the brain for how people multitask. But what this one neuroscientist said to me has stuck with me all these years. And he said to me, imagine, Eve, I could convince you, we men can convince you women that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes. How great for my career and my tenure. And not only that, I've convinced you that you're better at it. So you want to do it. How cool is that? And so he was joking because he was like, I don't really want you to write this book because I don't really want you dispelling the notion that women aren't better multitaskers because it's helping me. And then finally, so many other women said to me, well, in the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I might as well just do it myself. So for that one, I went to Professor Dan Ariely a good friend, a behavioral economist, who said that's the worst argument he's ever heard for women. Of course, it makes sense to have somebody teach them or tell them how to wipe asses and do dishes because it's at the expense of your finite time. So I think the most important point that I learned across my fair play journey was that my time is not sand and my husband's time is not diamonds. My time is diamonds too. And I deserve just as much time choice over how I use my time than Seth did. And so when I was able to say to him, you have 4 hours after our kids go to bed to check the news on your phone, to respond to emails from your work, to finish your PowerPoint deck and work out. Whereas I feel like I'm doing things in service of my household till the minute my head hits the pillow at midnight. My time is sand and your time is diamonds. And I want both of our time to be equal. We both just get 24 hours in a day. And I deserve a little bit more time choice over how I use my day. And that is what I will say, that magic formula. I can't tell you about communication until you recognize, we all recognize out there that you have a permission to be unavailable. And that's where we have to do that work on ourselves, that our time is diamonds.
I mean, that's the tweet. Oh my gosh, our time is diamonds too. It's an eye opener for people, I think. And the way you lay it out is, it's not arguable at that point, right? And it's a big deal. Okay, question for you. On obviously with the pandemic and the lack of childcare and sort of the infrastructure buckling under moms, and we talked about those couple of headlines. Is there an expansion pack of the cards and fair play that detail sort of additional things that have come up during the pandemic? So e-learning and sort of the childcare that we talked about, the mom at the kitchen table with the snacks and the kind of noisy setup and the dad in the office. But how are you thinking about sort of that hurricane of circumstances and how fair play kind of solves for that?
Well, it's the ultimate wild card. So I talk about a glitch in the matrix, right? We're living in a glitch in the matrix. But actually, ironically, all the things that are stressing women out, a lot of them are actually already in the cards. And I did a survey of women, and I'm going to pull it up here because this gets to how we communicate. If this overwhelms you right now and you say, I can't have a conversation about all these cards, right? What I tell people to do is start with the dirty dozen, the things. And I want to ask you out there, now that you know the framework of conception and planning and execution, I want everybody on this call to ignore execution. Ignore who's actually going to the store for the mustard. But I want to know of these dirty dozen bingo that I'm going to say, how many of these do you hold the conception and planning, the cognitive labor, the reminding, the noticing, right? The planning. So I'm going to read them out. These were the 12 that came up as the hardest right now for couples, the ones they're fighting most over. And this is where I'd like people to start. And we can talk about some communication tips of how to broach these conversations. But if I will tell you, if you are a mother out there who's holding every single one of these cards most of the time, then you're going to have costs on your career, on your mental health, on your friendships, on the boundary around your ability to have any uninterrupted time, what I call unicorn space, for the active pursuits that make you you. So these were the ones that were hardest. They were groceries, dishes, meals, that includes snacks, tidying up, home supplies, like who's securing masks and hand sanitizer, cleaning, garbage, and laundry. That's if you didn't have kids. If you have children, you add discipline and screen time for kids, which actually I was surprised by. Friendship for kids, which I was surprised by. This idea that, there's a lot of stress around creating socialization for kids who are not in school. Homeschool, it used to be the homework card, it's become the homeschool card, homeschool project and supplies. And finally, watching kids or pets. Whether it's a toddler who can go in the other room and kill themselves or a teenager who's trying to escape quarantine. So that dirty dozen you can find that on Fair Play Life. That dirty dozen is, if you're holding all of those right now, then that's a crisis. That's a mental health crisis. And so that's why I see you single parents. This is unsustainable. And if you have a partner in your home, you deserve some relief from these dirty dozen. So how do you get to a conversation, whether it's with a roommate or your partner, or even I'd say for single parents, this is actually a conversation with your workplace, right? Because your workplace is going to be your village. And sometimes you may have to ask for flexibility now. So what I would say is that there's very simple rules as a mediator we talk about a lot. It's really not rocket science, Colleen and Heba, but I will say that I've been saying these communication rules for 10 years. And when I started to actually practice them, I realized it's much harder said than done. And so I think it could be fun. Let's just unpack them for a minute because we have a little time. So I want to do the quiz. So Colleen, what's your partner's name?
Nick.
Okay, so can you picture a time when your emotion was high and your cognition was low over some dirty dozen argument? So I just want you to, just picture that, okay? And I'm going to ask you what Nick would say about you. So I'm going to give you seven choices. It's like a reverse newlywed game. Would Nick say that you're long-winded? Wah, 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 you're talking, no one's listening. 2, that in that case you use sharp commands, that your drill sergeant delivery is not popular with the troops, that you use bad timing, you drop your grievances and requests for help into the conversation at inopportune moments, like thanks for the flowers, honey, but you forgot dishwashing detergent again. 4, toxic word choice. I wasn't going to say anything, but I really hate it when or my friend Claudia, she calls herself a verbal assassin, which is similar to toxic words. Things like, she says in a very calm tone, things like, I'm just confused. Did you think you were going to become the worst father that's ever existed? Like, was that something that you envisioned was going to happen to you? So she's a verbal assassin. 5, all or nothing. You never replace the toilet paper roll. You always leave the seat up. 6, dredging up the past. This is just like the last time you forgot to. Or 7, boiling over. I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't say anything. I tried to avoid this conversation, but now I'm really pissed. What do you think Nick would say about you?
And we can only pick one?
Yeah. I mean, I like that.
I wrote it down. I'm like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
I love it.
I would probably say if I had to pick one, I would pick 7.
Okay. And give me an example of what may happen for you to boil over.
We actually live apart during the week, which is temporary, but has been stressful. And one of the things that he does is take out the garbage to the curb on Monday mornings when he leaves to go back downstate, and he didn't do it. And it is not something that takes a very long time to do.
Yeah.
But I just lost it. I mean, it was a blueberry moment.
Yeah, I get that. I've had many garbage moments. We could talk about that, but
garbage it's a hot topic.
Garbage is everything. That was another one besides extracurricular sports that I had to really unpack what was going on there. So I love that because I'll tell you what happened there. And for anybody who resonates with any of those 7, Heba, do you have one? How do you communicate?
Well, my partner and I, we don't live together, but we were doing long distance for a while. So the communication has to be like on point, but I'm definitely, and it's very bad, but I'm the one that like brings up the past. But I'm working on it, Eve. I have your book now. So
I love it.
Working on it.
Well, I love dredging up the past people because actually it's very similar to my boiling over people. So we can actually address both at once. Typically, when you're dredging up the past or you're boiling over, it's because you're giving feedback in the moment. So I want to unpack that for a minute. So if I'm going to leave you with 3 steps you can take today. So you may say, I need to live in a little bit more of the consciousness raising that my time is diamonds. That took me 8 years, right? I don't want people going tomorrow and starting throwing cards at their partner, right? This is a practice of recognizing that this is a system that you enter over time and you practice. But something you would actually do today that is really powerful is you can really start changing your communication immediately. And so 1 is exactly what we just did. It's just recognizing your own vulnerability. When you're vulnerable, you can journal about it. You can just think about it. When I realized that tone was my issue, we got to have some humor because Seth was able to say to me when I said, shit, I have terrible tone. He said, yes, you are nails on a chalkboard. And not only that, you could be saying like, I want to have sex with you, but I hear just the nails on the chalkboard because of your tone, right? So at some point, Seth was telling me he was tuning me out for everything I was saying, even the good things, because he was very scared of my tone, right? And so I think recognizing that we're already communicating is very important. Now, a boiling over person, Colleen, is also somebody who uses other forms of relief, whether it's complaining to her friends because they're not having the direct conversations. My favorite was a woman in a Facebook group during COVID, a 27,000 member Facebook group called "The Reasons I Hate My Husband and Kid During COVID," our kids and family during COVID. And I reached out to her because she had this post that said, "If my husband dies during COVID, it's not because of the disease, it's because of me." So I was like, ooh, okay, I want to DM her. So I found her, DM'd her and say, I'm a researcher. I'd love to know what your, communication practice is about the home. And she writes me back, "Oh, I don't communicate with my partner about the home. It's too triggering. This is my safe space." Okay, so I'm just here to tell you that if you don't think you're communicating about the home, but you're publicly threatening to murder your partner in a 27,000 member Facebook group, then I'm here to tell you, you are already communicating. So I think this idea that so many people said they don't communicate about domestic life. I'm a mediator. I'll go onto your Nest Cam. Heba, I'll see 5 ways you've communicated about domestic life when you're with your partner. And so that idea that, one, we're already communicating. What's our vulnerability when we actually communicate? It's not a start, it's a shift because we're all doing it. We're all communicating already. Number 2, get out of giving feedback in the moment. That's the hardest part. It's something that took me years and years to learn, and I'm perfecting it. It's a practice, but I am getting way better at it now than I was 3 years ago. And the third step is that if you're not going to give feedback in a moment, you have to know you're going to have a time to give feedback. And Colleen, I think that's probably part of the problem, is that you don't have a chance to do a 10-minute night check-in because you're apart from each other during the week, right? So maybe it's that instilling that over FaceTime that we have to, even though we want to doom scroll Twitter, we first have to spend 10 minutes with each other, looking at each other face to face. So Seth and I do it with what Dan Ariely calls short-term reward substitution. Every night we 1980s it. We sort of leave our kids alone in their beds, and we're like, it's fine if we walk around the block, or we bring tequila or cookie dough, and we prioritize our check-in more than we prioritize exercise, more than we prioritize meditation, more than we prioritize any other practice. So if you can start looking at communication as a practice and not a means to an end, it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And I know when I mediate, my clients who take that away from our mediation, that communication is a practice, they do amazing with in their family organizations for forever.
Yeah, I'm into it. I'm sure my husband also will be. I want to segue into work because we've only got about 10 minutes. And I'm hoping that Fair Play version 2 is all about fair play in the workplace. But I'm going to segue over to Heba, who has a couple of questions about fair play in the workplace.
Yeah.
Yes. So I know, Eve, as you've just been talking, that fair play at home is huge, but how can we translate all of your great tips from the book into fair play at work? Because a lot of the women in our community are also trying to figure out how to get that fair play balance in the workplace as well. So what do you think about that?
It's a great question. I think that there's a policy answer, and then there's the actual practical answers for people who are in the midst of looking for a job or going back to work. And that is looking for a workplace that values predictability and flexibility, right? And so what I mean by that is asking strategic questions of what are my explicitly defined expectations here? How will I know my role? Do you have predictable hours for how people work? There are red flags if you hear things like we have unlimited vacation days. There's red flags if you hear things like, oh, we trust you just to get your work done whenever you get it done, right? Those are red flags actually, because you think they sound like flexibility, but actually those are cultures that typically mean that there's no boundaries, that people are on every part of the day. So I would say even more than looking at sort of the family-friendly policies, even though we'll talk about how those are important, I think understanding how policies also intersect with how manager flexibility works. So is my manager going to be the only one making decisions for me? Because that's also a red flag. Are there policies? So you want that good balance. So for example, I talked to a federal government institution. They have fairness. They say it's all fairness. Everyone who's a tier 1 manager has to be back in the office by December 1st. That's not a great job, right? For people who have caretaking responsibilities, because that means they're not taking into account, they think that's being fair because all managers are treated the same. That's equality, that's not equity. And so you want to look for a place that has that sweet spot between, as my colleague calls it, predictability and flexibility, with questions like, is there a predictable amount of time I could be on? Are you okay if each day I tell you I'm on from 9 to 2, but then I'm off from 2 to 5, right? You want people to value that, and you'll hear it in the way they start talking about the workplace. Now, in terms of policies, what I think, eventually, what does an Earth 2.0 workplace look like after the pandemic? In my dream, working with the Mom Project to get us there, is what I call fair play, fair day, and fair pay. And so fair play is recognizing that the motherhood penalty is the biggest discrimination against women on record, right? That when we have caregiving responsibilities, we lose 5 to 7% of our wages. So fair play is normalizing men doing care. Fair day is recognizing that we don't have to be an ideal worker in a seat anymore, right? You're not Shawshank Redemption where you have to raise your hand to take a piss, but that you get to have flexibility, but understanding that work from home is not the same thing as flexible work, that predictability and flexibility. And then fair pay stems from those two things, because pay equity actually means that you're valued. It means that women's work is not paid less, right? So we have to get rid of that motherhood penalty, ironically, which starts in the home. So that's why I become so passionate about fair play, because I used to think it all started from the workplace. But actually, most of the penalties that we see in terms of wage stagnation for women is because of the perception that we are burdened with the cards. So what if you can do like a cool thing where you walked into your manager and said, "Hi, my name's Eve Rodsky. My husband holds 60 cards. I'm going to be highly committed to the workplace, so do not penalize me with the motherhood penalty. I don't want to lose 5 to 10% of my wages because you're making me general counsel and not partner. And you think that that's great for me because I'm now a 1099 in the beauty industry instead of a corporate employee, right? That's not doing me a favor." And so we can do that by combating the motherhood penalty by normalizing care. So that's my vision. That's my dream for the world. And I think the more we can all work together as cultural warriors. And I will say, if you have a partner who is doing this fairly with you, instead of saying, "I don't need to hear these messages," it's the opposite. Have your partner normalize care in their workforce. Let them show what they do. Have them talk about it. Parent out loud, as my friends Dave Smith and Brad Johnson say. Men need to parent out loud.
That's fantastic. We've got a lot of work to do. So which is not a secret to anyone that tuned in for this call, but this has been, I think, very high level and also very practical at the same time. And so we're so grateful for you coming here and sharing all these kind of research data-backed insights about, the kind of macro forces that really cause a lot of this. So final question, because I know we only have a couple minutes left. Knowing this audience, this is, working moms, job seeking moms, moms who are currently weathering a pandemic, working from home. If there's one thing you could leave them with, what would it be today?
I think what I'd leave you with, right, is that it's the same thing I started with, right? We're not here to fix you. We are here to fix the workplaces and the homes that we have found ourselves in. There's no guilt, there's no shame in whatever has happened to you. As my good friend Cheryl Gonzalez Ziegler says, she's my favorite psychologist that I go to for many things. She says you reframe that guilt starting today. So anytime that you may feel guilty about what's happening on your plate, I feel guilty I didn't get to my resume search. I feel guilty because I didn't get to put my kids to bed last night. You reframe that decision to say, I made that decision because. So that reframe is what I would leave everybody with. This is a hard time. And this is unprecedentedly bad. And so we have no social safety nets. We are all here for you. But I will say that one practical thing that I've done during the pandemic is I reframe guilt. So when I want to work on my book and my kids, and Seth is putting my kids to bed, and I'm not going to see my kids to at bedtime, I say I made that decision because uninterrupted time for something that I love, my flow state, is linked to my mental health and my longevity. If you can't get to the resume that you wanted to that day, you say, I made that decision because I wanted to put my kids to bed. And that was really important to me. So I didn't have time to mark up my resume. So reframe any sort of guilt or shame and see what happens when you take the power back by saying you made that decision because.
This has been so amazing. Thank you so much, Eve. And I know we've got a bunch of people live on the session today. So for all of those of you who RSVP'd and came live today, we have a special treat from Eve and her team we have 2 books of Fair Play and also 2 card packs to give away. So the way we're going to do that, if you can just, as you get the link to the recording, we would love as many women as possible to see this recording and be able to share in some of the insights Eve has shown here today. And so if you could just share that out on your social media with one of your favorite lines from Eve, we will then draw at random and be able to send out some of those books and card decks. I do have it on my list for Christmas. So I will be buying one. I already have the book, but I love the card deck. And this has just been so incredible, Eve. So thank you so much. We'll also link to the site, which has some incredible resources as well, as well as a link to the book. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Heba. Thank you, Colleen. I love your community. And I can't wait to keep fighting for gender justice with you in 2021.
We're going to lobby for moms. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Eve. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.